Hello again, this is All Games podcast number 15. This is the second part of our program. Last time we were discussing relationships between the worlds of video games and cinema, and today we're going to continue this discussion with our guest Carifan. Do you think that introducing elements from other art categories like cinematic or fixed camera angles, cutscenes, especially pre-rendered ones, different from the actual gameplay in older games, mostly evident in older games because the graphic quality wasn't as good as cutscenes. If you recall games like Final Fantasy, they became very famous because they had all 4 discs packed cutscenes, great looking cutscenes, also compulsive plotline, even in smallish kind of flash games that you can play on the web, getting released like every week or so. Are all these things really necessary for further development and acceptance of video games as a medium? Our gameplay ideas are not enough?
Whether you consider them art, which obviously they are, using these types of cinematic devices within games, it's something that people are familiar with in telling a story. Like, you have a limited way of showing that in video games, so having, clips of people talking or expounding upon the story to make it move along between where you're actually playing some type of game. It's not necessary, but I think it helps create a story, right?
But today we came to the point where almost all the games that are getting released, I'm not sure about sport ones, have some sort of a cutscene or all these cinematic tricks. The gameplay and just these cutscenes don't always align together very well, because there was a game called Tomb Raider, the recent one. Basically it showcased Lara Croft as just a newbie, not a great archaeologist. She just started in this game, she was just a student, and basically she starts with getting shipwrecked, and the game shows how she struggles to survive in this new environment, some sort of island. She can't find any of her buddies. But as game progresses, she starts to be a tough girl. She starts to, blasting heads of some mercenaries, ripping them apart with, this pick or whatever she had. And this cutscene still showing her presenting in a way like she's a vulnerable woman, and her friends really worried about her because she's still being a novice in all this business. But the gameplay shows you totally different thing. Like she blows up villages, burns down some cities to the ground, stuff like that. And it just gets to so ridiculous that cutscenes go almost in counterpoint to the actual gameplay.
Yeah, I think they're trying to make some sort of interactive environment, sort of like virtual reality, right? I think the graphics are becoming much more real-like, so they want people to experience like they're in control of a character in a world. They can do anything, and I think they're leading to virtual reality. As graphics become better and better, I think people will find themselves playing games where they're actually inside the game, moving around themselves, whether it's with the Oculus Rift headset on, right? Obviously it was bought out by Facebook recently, and so they believe it has a very good future and a way of getting people into an online world.
Yes, well, I remember several games that were called Fahrenheit, and the other called Heavy Rain. Basically, the first one is somewhat interactive movie, but not in a way of using real-life actors, but it just has quick time events, where basically interactive cutscene, as you mentioned earlier, a way to, make games more interactive, because where a person doesn't play these games, he kind of becomes a bit of dissociated from this game, and these quick time events were basically designed to prevent it, so you're involved all the time. But with Heavy Rain, actually, it kind of became ridiculous, because this game is just, a huge animated interactive movie, and some opening scenes just totally ridiculous, because there was this guy, protagonist, and you had to help him to arrange dinner plates on the table. If you press the wrong button, he's gonna drop or break them. So I'm not sure if it's what all the industry is coming to or not, because today we only see examples of a fresh game. Either they're coming from indie companies, because I'd like to remember a game called Reckless Disregard for Gravity, which is a base jumping simulator. So basically you just jump down from some point and try to score as much points as you can, just like in this Tony Hawk's games and etc. But in this game, obviously, you're falling down to your death or not. You need to touch the buildings by flying very close to them and so on. But this game, I just want to use it as an example of something original, because most of the games, even those indies, if you take a look at Steam today, you see that there's so many games, so many companies offer these, very simplistic platform games where you just have to run from one corner of the screen to another while avoiding falling to death by jumping onto the spikes or something like this. It's just amazing that this kind of endless flow of these games today. Even indie developers don't want to actually introduce any new ideas, and of course you can't expect the major AAA ones like Ubisoft or Electronic Arts to introduce anything new. So that's why I actually was interested in this question. If all these tricks that came from cinema world are really necessary today for the acceptance of video games. Maybe it's because these days video games have so much more wider audience who are not ready to dive in, hardcore gameplay. Maybe that was the reason why in the mid-noughties this casual market of games become such a prominent thing. Always combined free or, hidden object games become popular because they're just very diluted games.
Yeah, casual games, they provide an experience to a person for a limited amount of time, and it provides enjoyment and it's fun to play. And investing hours and hours of time to play one of the modern Call of Duty games or things like that, it takes a lot of effort, and some people can't or won't play for that amount of time, or they don't have the technique to play that.
Yeah, they just gonna play these Facebook games, their workplace, the office, right?
Yes.
Let's move on to the next question. What are the techniques typically seen in video games? For example, non-linear gameplay with several ways to advance story and cinema. For example, an open-ended final that leaves it to the viewer to speculate on the meaning of the whole picture. That might work in the hour, but aren't used or used not often enough.
One thing I thought of was different type scenes with different endings. One movie I thought of was Run, Lola, Run. You've seen that. Basically, a girl goes through a story 3 different times, and the first 2 times she dies. She has to progress again and again until she gets the correct ending. I thought that was a really fun movie. But it's not done very often in cinema compared to, video games. One other thing I thought of was the slow motion shooting used in The Matrix, and at the time also came out a game called Max Payne, which used the same bullet time, slow motion, right? But again, cinema was using slow motion bullet fights way earlier in the 70s. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, he was the one that originated that style.
John Woo made it popular in the late 80s. Again.
Yes, John Woo also, yeah. But again, the main idea from video games that are used in movies are motion capture, CGI effects. Yeah. The big budget movies that are coming out right now are computer animated movies, whether they're, animation like Disney and Pixar, or, special effect type movies, the comic book movies.
Like the recent Guardian of the Galaxy.
Yes, yeah, they all use massive amounts of computer-generated effects. Basically, movies like Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, that was a completely CGI animation movie.
One of the first, if not the first. I mean, as it posed itself as a movie, not as a, like Pixar, that advertises just like cartoons.
Yeah, not very many serious type science fiction movies are done. I think the ones that have been tried in the past, they haven't been very successful. People seem to like more comedy type animation for kids.
Alright, I see. So do you think that cinema can adopt anything else from a video game world, or it just won't work? Because a lot of things that happens in video games, they have to do with choice that is player presented with, and it's just difficult to show it on the big screen unless you have some picture-in-picture or something like that.
I think what it's leading up to is virtual reality, where you're actually inside a computer-generated environment and following some sort of story. But I think first they have to develop character artificial intelligence enough so that if you're interacting with somebody in a story, they have to be able to react in a real-life manner, right? And I think the technology today is not there yet, but it's progressing along, right?
Well, I remember one more movie, the video game subjects, certain science fiction film from 1999, film that is other than The Matrix, and also it is not a 13th floor. The movie, in fact, is called Existence. It was directed by David Cronenberg, and it's taken a virtual reality concept to a new direction, where the game world resembles adventure arcade games. Basically, it's a movie that tells us about a video game device, some kind of, console or whatever it is, which connects directly to the human body. For example, in this movie, where characters are in the game world, we go to certain restaurant, also showing video games and interesting lights. Jude Law, while eating, he makes a gun out of the bones from the dish that he had ordered. I don't recall what it was, chicken or not. Basically, he builds a gun, and when he loads it with his own teeth and shoots the waiter, because it was just, part of the game screenplay.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, there are other movies that use virtual reality, like Strange Days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was directed by Catherine Bigelow. She was James Cameron's wife at the time. Also, I think Johnny Mnemonic, with Keanu Reeves.
Mm-hmm.
That was a cyberpunk story.
Yes, I read it.
Where he's able to load programs into his brain directly and move information around. Another one I found interesting was Surrogates with Bruce Willis. The whole society has transformed where everybody's hooked into basically computer environment and playing with avatars of themselves.
Yeah, I recall that film as well. They're all the robots, right?
Yes, yeah. They're all basically avatar type characters walking around.
Just not as blue.
Not as blue, right? I think WALL-E also used that, Pixar's WALL-E. When the robot finally encounters humans, they're big, fat, and lazy and hooked up into virtual reality machines also. I think that's one of the fears that movies show, people becoming too addicted to virtual reality. That'll take over humanity's life and people won't be living their ordinary lives anymore.
Yes, I see. Well, it's actually a very common topic in the movies. I think the fear of technology, to avoid technology, kind of ludism.
One other topic that came to mind was the use of games as a training to perform battles and warfare. The early film, The Last Starfighter, 1984, was one that used basically an arcade machine that was planted by alien culture, and it was a way to measure a person's ability to engage in warfare. And one guy who beat the game was beamed up to their spaceship and took part in intergalactic war. And recently there was also Ender's Game was a recent movie that also used that. We had a school of teenage kids who were deigned to be the best at playing games and their reflexes, and basically it was a training to perform in a real war, which they didn't know was actually happening.
Were the video games shown in a good light or bad light in this film?
Were they shown in a good light or bad light?
Mm-hmm. I mean, because, a lot of these cheapskate politicians like to play this tactic by just telling, the video games are just murder simulators or something like that. That can damage people with unstable psyches.
Yes, yeah. I think in those particular movies, there were different viewpoints that were presented. It could be very dangerous if somebody uses them for, training real-life soldiers. But in actuality, they do, because governments use video game simulators to train their fighters, right? Like America's Army or
yes.
Other games of that sort.
I actually recall that there was a special version of Armed Assault game, the first-person shooter, which was sold to some governments, I think to American government, as a training set.
Yes. But then again, it does improve a person's reflexes and perception of connecting different facts in whether it be on the internet or anywhere in computerscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to people playing games. But like you said, media and government tends to concentrate on the bad.
Well, scandalous stories sells better than something else. So, the last question then, most anticipated question, actually about movies which are based on video games. Do you think they all suck equally?
Well, there haven't been very many successful movies based on video games. I think the most popular one has been Tomb Raider.
Mm-hmm.
That was so many years ago already. I think people would prefer to play the game rather than to view a movie based on the video game characters. Most of the projects that end up being adapted don't have a good screenplay, so they don't really translate well.
So yes, they actually have the exact problem as, video game developers, how to adopt this or that feature from the movies to the computer program, and screenwriters and directors of the film have exactly the same problem of how to adapt a certain, gameplay mechanic, how to show it in a film, so, audience will be interested in seeing this without being ridiculous. Like, there have been, I think, several early films like Mario Brothers, Street Fighter, which actually tried to camp approach. At least I think it was camp approach. Maybe they just sucked so bad, it was just beyond any redemption.
Right.
But it's not like the serious approach helped them as well, because of Uwe Boll, right, or whatever, how his name's pronounced.
Yes.
And he tried to shoot some serious films like Alone in the Dark and Dungeon Siege, both based on, Blood Rain as well. All these based on certain video games. I think they all bombed box office. Well, at least they were not popular with critics.
I think recently they've tried to make more big budget type movies, but they're having problems with how much money to invest in them. You've probably heard that they were adapting Halo as a movie.
It's been some time, yes?
Right. They ended up cancelling it because it was too high a budget and they didn't think there would be a big enough audience.
Easier to make a game, another sequel.
Yes, yeah. Although, right now they are making the World of Warcraft movie, which is very expensive, so...
Oh my god, it's just... why?
Yeah, we'll see how it does.
Well, do you think there's actually need to, bring these games to the screen now, today? Because, you can basically create everything you want now, and it will be quite realistic, and I think you won't need as big budget to just, draw it on the screen. With games like Crysis, which I think set this graphics level very high.
Well, I guess you'd have to ask the movie producers. They want to bring in kids especially to go and watch movies, and obviously since our video games are very popular with kids, that's the way to bring them into the theater. But like you said, I mean, there haven't been any really popular ones, adaptations recently, so it's sort of a dilemma for them. I mean, how many comic book movies can they make before, people get sick of them?
Well, I think they already reached that level.
Yes. They're trying to compete with the video game market, and looks like they'll keep doing it until they get some success.
Is it really that games and the film industry is very separated or not?
As separated as they were 30 years ago. Today, do you see them merging anytime soon?
Well, Steven Spielberg has said that, virtual reality type movies are the future of cinema. So, obviously, it has to be made by computer-generated images. So that's sort of the convergence we're heading to right now. But it's still some years away.
I think so.
Yeah, but only one Steven Spielberg is not enough. Other companies and critics have a lot of prejudice about video games.
Well, he got his pal George Lucas to help him with this one.
As far as video games becoming art, well, they are art. I mean, they have wonderful visuals, which is the same as movies are accomplishing, presenting a beautiful interaction of a world, and conveying emotion, I think, is what some people find lacking in video games. But there's recent games like The Walking Dead which were highly praised for making people feel sad about the characters and having them die, things like that. I think that's something that is improving in games in general.
Okay, I see. Well, I think this concludes our today's discussion. I hope everybody had a good time.
Yeah.
Yes, very interesting discussion indeed.
So we would like to thank Scarifon for participating, for his unique take on our today's topic.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. And you've been listening to oldgames.ru podcast number 15 with Virgil
And the mouse.
Have fun and stay tuned for more. Bye!